You know that feeling when you're trying to read an academic paper or maybe a really dense corporate memo, and it just feels like you are wading through a thicket of heavy, immovable words? Well, in today's explainer, we are diving straight into Lesson 19, Nominalization Strategies. We're going to break down the actual literal mechanics of how writers build these heavy sentences, and honestly, more importantly, we'll see how understanding this one hidden mechanism can completely transform the way you read and write complex information.
So seriously, why does academic writing sound so incredibly stiff? You've definitely noticed this before, but today we're going to diagnose the exact root cause of that rigid, overly formal tone. It's not just that academics sit around picking long, obscure vocabulary words just to sound smart. That stiffness, it actually comes from a very deliberate grammatical choice. In academic English, there is this massive preference for an impersonal style. The whole goal is to distance the writer from the text, to project a sense of pure objectivity. To pull that off, writers lean heavily on certain sentence structures, and we are going to look at the primary engine driving this formal style right now.
The main culprit here is a neat little grammatical trick called nominalization. Basically, this is the process of forming noun phrases out of other types of words. It is literally how writers freeze dynamic, moving actions and completely transform them into static nouns. So instead of describing someone or something actively performing an action, which is what verbs normally do, writers repackage those actions, events, and traits as objects, or concepts. But why? Why do they do this? Well, freezing actions into nouns allows writers to efficiently package highly complex ideas into tight spaces. Once an action is frozen into an object, it can be easily manipulated as a single piece within a much larger, complex argument. It shifts the entire focus away from the people doing the things and puts it squarely on the relationships between the concepts themselves.
Let's compare two different approaches to see this freezing effect perfectly in action. Think about the phrase, "The train leaves at 5 p.m." That's just everyday action-oriented speech, right? You can literally picture the train moving out of the station. The verb leaves gives the sentence energy and a clear timeline. Now contrast that with a much more noun-heavy version, the train's 5 p.m. departure. It's a subtle shift, but wow, look at what just happened. The dynamic happening right now action of leaving has been completely frozen into a static object, a departure. The whole event is now packaged neatly into one single noun phrase. It's incredibly efficient if you want to cram a lot of information into a broader argument, but it fundamentally changes the entire vibe of the sentence, from active to highly objective.
To really wrap our heads around the impact of freezing actions into nouns, there's this absolutely brilliant analogy from a university lecturer in our source material that just hits the nail on the head. They explain that these abstract nouns are essentially a superpower because they act as the skeleton of your text. And it's true. You simply cannot write complex academic sentences without nouns. They hold up the entire rigid structure of your arguments. But, and this is a big but, a skeleton desperately needs muscle to actually move. Your verbs are that muscle. When you rely solely on the noun phrases, your text has this massive, heavy framework, but it just sits there. When you inject verbs, your language automatically gains the dynamic muscle required to actually propel your writing forward.
But here is the dark side of that superpower. What happens when you lose that critical balance? Overusing abstract nouns makes your writing what the lecturer calls ossified, rigid, bony, and completely lifeless. When you freeze absolutely every action into a noun, you are relying entirely on that skeletal structure. The result? The text loses all of its dynamic energy. It's such a common pitfall. The writer thinks they're sounding highly academic, super professional, and formal. But the reader? The reader just feels like they are chewing on dry bones. The writing completely lacks the muscle needed to easily carry someone from one thought to the next.
Okay, let's see how this grammatical trap works in practice. Take a sentence that relies heavily on an abstract noun, like "the road created a connection between two villages." The abstract noun we've got here is connection. But because the main action is frozen inside that noun, the sentence is forced to lean on a really weak filler verb, created, just to function. And the problem is, a road can't really create anything on its own, right? It introduces this weird, clunky ambiguity. Now consider the muscular version of that same thought. The road connected two villages. Boom, we turn the abstract noun back into a verb. The verb is now doing the actual work, making the sentence shorter, crystal clear, and so much punchier.
And this exact same logic applies totally outside the classroom too. It's the secret ingredient of dense business jargon. If you have ever skimmed a corporate strategy document, you have definitely seen phrases like driving improvements in the business. It sounds super serious and professional, doesn't it? But really think about it. We aren't literally driving anything. Driving is just this weak filler verb acting as padding to support the abstract noun improvements. If we just use direct action instead and say improving the business, it's so much stronger. By unfreezing the noun and using the verb that does the real work, we ditch the bloated jargon and communicate with sleek, genuine muscle.
So how do we actually fix this in our own work? Well, to empower you to check if your writing is a bit too bony, here is a literal search and replace hack you can use today. Abstract nouns are actually incredibly easy to spot because they tend to share similar endings. You can literally use the search function on your computer to look for suffixes like ion, as in observation, idity, like conformity, ment, as in agreement, and there are others too, like ac, ence, ability, and ness. All of these suffixes are huge red flags that you're dealing with abstract nouns. If your document lights up with these endings, it's a clear signal that you are relying way too heavily on nominalization, which means you're likely draining your text's energy and padding your sentences with weak filler verbs.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is to audit your own writing. You have to find that perfect balance between structure and action. Nominalization is undeniably a powerful tool. It lets you efficiently package complex, abstract ideas into those dense noun phrases that actually make up over 65% of academic texts. It's necessary. But always remember, a skeleton cannot move without muscle. Strip away those weak filler verbs and let your real verbs do the heavy lifting. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you sit down to write an important email, an essay, or a report, ask yourself, is your writing just taking up space on the page, or is it actually moving your ideas forward?